midterm project where I will be breaking down the most basic components. Car Mechanic Simulator 2018. I'm well versed on how to use it. Alright, starting off with your engine block. The engine block serves more so as a central mounting point for the rest of your stuff. And opens your exhaust valves in unison with the pistons. Next up, we're going to put on the cam gear. The cam gear optimizes camshaft rotation when in operation with your crankshaft. Next up, we're going to go for the fuel filter. The fuel filter cleans dirt and rust particles from the fuel before entering the engine, because if you have those nasty particles and stuff, it can tear up the internal mechanisms. After that, we're going for the ignition coil, which is up here on the top right. The ignition coil amplifies voltage from the battery to your spark plugs. If you do not know, voltage is a unit of measurement for electricity and electrical current. Next up, we're going for the power steering pump. Your power steering pump is very important because in modern cars, pretty much anything post probably the 60s, 70s, has power steering, which is a fluid which helps you turn your steering wheel without having to put as much pressure. It's the same idea as a pulley system. It makes something far easier with less effort. After that, I'm going to put on the crankshaft. The crankshaft is one of the most important parts of the engine. It rotates your pistons. Without it, you would not have a running engine. After that, I'm going to put on the timing chain. Alright, your timing chain keeps your camshaft and your crankshaft in tune with each other. If your timing is off, you will have misfires or something similar to that, which just means your engine won't run properly. After that, I'm going to put on the water pump, which sounds like it would pump water, but it does not. It pumps coolant from the radiator through the coolant system into the engine, back around. Your crankshaft pulley, which is this thing down here, drives the accessory belts, which in turns drive the alternator, air conditioning compressor, your power steering pump, and your water pump, and several other things. Next up, we're going to put on the serpentine belt. There's two serpentine belts on this engine. They help power your, they turn and build mechanical energy, which powers your alternator, steering pump, and air conditioner. After that, I'm going to put on the alternator. The alternator keeps the battery charged while the vehicle is running, and stores energy to send to your starter once you try to start the car back up. After that, I'm going to put on the oil filter, which is down here, and you should replace that upon every time you do an oil change. But the oil filter removes contaminants from the engine oil, so that way you don't tear up the insides of your engine. After this, I'm going to put on the ignition distributor. Alright, also another very important part of the engine. It routes electricity from the ignition coil to each spark plug at the exact time it is needed. Let me put on these caps and the additional clips. Without these clips, it would more than likely fall apart and cause massive issues with your engine. After the ignition distributor, I'm going to put on the water pump pulley and your other serpentine belt. Next up is we're going to be putting in the pistons themselves. The piston converts energy released during the combustion process into energy. Alright. Yes, I'd like to install that. This engine is a V8, which means that it has 8 pistons in a V format. There's many different types of engine patterns. If you want to learn more about them, go somewhere else, because that's not what I'm doing. And on each piston you have piston rings, which seal the combustion chamber, so that way you don't have any explosive outward force. If one of these piston rings breaks, you can have a hole in the engine from a piston flying apart, and that's just a whole lot of stuff you don't want to get into. Next up, I'm putting on the engine heads. The heads control airflow in and out of the cylinders, and oxygen and fuel deployment. Next up is your valve push rods. They move motion from the pistons to the valves and a few other parts I can't think of right now off the top of my head. There are 16, 2 for each piston, as pistons do produce a lot of energy. So as I put this on, hold tight. The rocker arms, I think I forgot to mention. The rocker arms control the motion of the push rods. Yeah. And then the valve cover, which is this engine head cover, they protect all of that inner working and other contaminants from entering in. Next, I will be putting in the spark plugs. Spark plugs ignite the air and fuel mixture by creating a spark. If you have a bad spark plug, your combustion process won't finish, and you will have low energy, or a cylinder might not fire at all, which can cause other issues. So make sure you check your spark plugs. I believe it's supposed to be every 6 months you should check. Alright, next up I will be putting on the exhaust manifold. Your exhaust manifold collects the exhaust fumes released during the combustion process and converts them and sends them to your catalytic converter, which then cleans the exhaust and sends it out of the car. Next up I'll be putting on the ignition wires, which connects your transfers the spark from the distributor and inward. Next up, I will be putting on the radiator fan, which mounts up here on the front. Helps keep the engine cool. Mainly to cool the radiator, because the radiator gets incredibly hot while having to deal with the transfer of coolant. Your flywheel stores the mechanical energy inside of the engine and balances it back out towards your gearbox. Your clutch plate creates friction between it. And then you put on the pressure plate, and the clutch release bearing, and that hooks up into your gearbox and allows you to move. Your intake manifold, which every car should have. Alright, your intake manifold evenly distributes the combustion mixture into the engine. In the engine I'm building is an older one and uses a carbureted system, which is a massive difference compared to most engines today. In a carbureted system, the fuel gets drawn directly from the tank and is sucked up into the engine. You have your air filter get placed on top of it, so that way it can filter through. In most modern cars, you have something which is called a fuel injection system. In a fuel injection system, you have a fuel pump, which pulls fuel from the tank, filters it, sends it back up to the fuel pump, not the fuel pump, your fuel filter, and filters out all the nasty grime that's still left and sends it directly into your pistons, bypassing the intake manifold. Which relies on an ECU, which I don't have because this is a much older engine. That's all. Thank you for watching my midterm project. I appreciate it.